Then we said goodnight to Broadway, giving it our best regards. Tipped our hats to Mr. Cohen, dear old Times Square's favorite bars. Then we raised a glass to JFK and a dozen more besides. When I got back to my empty room, I suppose I must have cried. Hey everybody, my name is Ian Garcia, this is Devotional Criticism, and welcome back to the New Movie Diary, a cinema criticism series in which I review recent, new, and up-and-coming film releases and attempt to give you the straight facts about them, in my humble opinion. Okay, so do you guys remember my video on Oz Perkins' long legs from this year? Actually, do you guys remember my video on long legs? Did anyone watch that much more than my other videos? Hold on, I gotta check. I'm sorry, I gotta check my metrics for a second. Okay, so do you guys remember my video on Oz Perkins' long legs from this year? So the important takeaway from that review basically is I gave it 2.5 out of 5. Very frustrating viewing experience for me, but nonetheless one where despite my broadly negative assessment of the movie, despite my lower end rating for it, I still encouraged my audience to go see it. And I want to use this as a baseline for anybody new catching on to this channel. When I call what I'm trying to do here devotional criticism, I really am trying to not just react to things. I'm trying to do my best out here to be a part of, to contribute to, and really boost up a more critical engagement with an art form and a medium that I love very much, that is very close to my heart. So part and parcel with that is that even when I can give a movie the most caustic, the most negative consideration I'm able to muster, which wouldn't necessarily be true of Long Legs. I've definitely had way worse things to say, even often about films that are way less on the cultural radar and possibly didn't deserve quite such shabby treatment from me because of it. But all of that is just going to say that even when I'm doing a negative review, even when I give a film a low rating, I'm really not doing this as a way of trying to actively dissuade people from seeing or not seeing any one particular film. Unless it's really bad, I still reserve the right to say what, in my humble opinion, just isn't worth any even semi-literate individual's time. But for real, I would much rather, my highest aspiration, honestly, in doing what I do in the devotional way I want to do it, is that you should be able to watch or listen to or read a review of mine, and even if that review is vehemently negative, you as a viewer or listener or reader should be able to take away at least enough about a shared passion for an art form and a medium that I hope you yourself would like to be as engaged with as possible as I do, that you're able to say, you know what, I got exactly what I needed from this review. I'm still going to see the movie because it sounds like it could be what I'm looking for, or I'm just curious to see what this is all about, etc., etc. I'm going to put this tea down for a second. I'm spilling it all over the place already. And that's not foreshadowing for any tea spilling. I literally just get so frantic sometimes when I'm doing this stuff that, like, I'm literally spilling my tea all over the place, like on my mic. It's not a good look. And quite frankly, going back to what I was saying before, that sentiment goes doubly for films like Long Legs, where really, if my review had any point at all, it was that I was giving it a broadly negative review, but I was still encouraging people to see it, because at least in that one case, I had enough of a humble presence of mind to be like, the very same things that I so viscerally got put off by with this movie, I'm not even certain that I get what this is going for, or that my negative insights are accidentally just me tripping over exactly what the film is supposed to be that I wasn't expecting. And I'm open-minded enough at times to have that response. There's a possibility that my negative reaction, and reactions are a lot of what we get of in terms of film culture nowadays, especially here on YouTube, where so-called reaction channels are light years more popular than review and criticism channels. There's the possibility that my negative reaction is getting in the way of a solid critique that I feel like my audience is owed for even clicking on this video and listening to me, especially in terms of really trying to spread the wealth of this wonderful medium and art form to try to get people to go outside of their comfort zones and see more and different kinds of films, and quite frankly, being okay with even viscerally negative experiences, because even being in that I don't know what the that even was position can still be incredibly edifying and fulfilling and elevating in our relationship with film. It's important to not put too much stock in number or letter ratings, but most definitely for a review like Longlegs, that 2 out of 5, you can either throw that all the way out the window or take it for granted. That doesn't mean I'm just saying overall it's mediocre. That is me literally just throwing my hands up in the air and being like, I don't know. I don't know what the that was. I don't even know what to tell you. Or better yet, I'm gonna need you out there to tell me sometimes, okay? Listen, I'm a movie snob. I'll cop to it. I got a lot of lines in the sand and hills I'm prepared to die on, but there are times where it would really be nice to just have people come back at me and either be like, yeah, dog, I don't know what about that either, or yo, here's what you're really missing here, man, that I got out of it. Which all brings us to The Brutalist, an internationally co-produced epic historical drama that follows Adrian Brody as Laszlo Toth, a Hungarian Jewish architect who, having been separated from his wife and niece and survived the Holocaust, emigrates to the United States in 1947 when our story begins. He settles in Philadelphia, where he basically just scrapes by, living dependently on his Americanized cousin, eventually being kicked out and living in charity housing, where he develops an addiction to heroin and goes from one dead-end job to the next before finally catching the eye of a rich industrialist by the name of Harrison Lee Van Buren, played by Guy Pearce. Van Buren, learning of Toth's infamy before the war as a pioneering figure in the development of the brutalist style of architecture and interior design, basically forces himself into being Toth's benefactor, having him live in guest lodgings on his property, commissioning him to build a huge community center on his property, and even promising to help Toth reunite with his estranged wife Erzsébet, played by Felicity Jones. Running at nearly 4 hours, The Brutalist is the latest collaboration between partners Brady Corbett and Mona Fastvold, who, since 2014, have basically alternated between duties co-writing and co-producing each other's directorial efforts, with Fastvold co-writing and co-producing The Brutalist and Corbett directing. Which is fantastic news for me, because even as someone who is shamefully not terribly familiar with the breadth of Corbett and Fastvold's work, I am a very keen proponent of their last collaboration, which was 2018's Vox Lux. If you haven't seen Vox Lux, I highly encourage you to do so. It's an absolutely incredible and unpredictable experience, and as my only preamble to my experience of The Brutalist, I will say that as far as Corbett's directorial work, there's certainly some structural and thematic echoes, both films taking the form of almost a biographical drama, but about a fictional person, both making considerable leaps over time, sometimes quite suddenly, with the experiences of the major characters being organized around impressions of significant historical periods or trends. And while I really loved Vox Lux, there's another thematic echo between these two films for me in terms of what turns out to be The Brutalist's own quite challenging and frustrating collision of what, at a surface level, seems to be attempting to be no more or less than a highly stylized, prestigious-looking character study and drama. But then also elements that
It might even be going too far to call it black humor, like there's something misanthropic to it. It's really stuff that, in a certain light, could be taken as dark humor, but I don't think Corbett or Fastfold really intend it to be that way. If anything, I would say what defines The Brutalist as this epic 4-hour story separated by a 15-minute intermission is this sustained humanist earnestness on Corbett and Fastfold's parts, even when the film is clearly intended to be funny at times, especially when we're sort of inevitably guffawing at the pretensions of Van Buren's character, Guy Pearce's rich benefactor character, for instance. Even then, there is more so this sense of Corbett and Fastfold's script and Corbett's direction of the film down to the very level of its editing and scoring and soundtrack cues, where there starts to be this uncanny sense of absurdity to much of the story. And again, I don't mean absurdity as in something funny. I mean in the sense of just these little things that are just odd and seem so counterpointal to what appears, again, at the surface, to be what a movie like The Brutalist, to be what an epic historical drama is supposed to be. All of which, over the course of the second half of this epic, kind of just comes spooling forth as the story reaches these melodramatic extremes that are so suddenly juxtaposed with this sweeping, epic faux biography that I had to finally just take a step back and be like, I don't know at all. I don't get what the this is going for on an emotional register. This movie has such a harsh, melodramatic pivot that you're like, what is this, Luca Guadagnino's I Am Love? Haha. Yeah, that's a great movie snob joke. So just to get this out of the way, The Brutalist is getting a 2.5 out of 5, and I cannot in good faith tell you, my viewer, that I liked it. But I am still recommending that you bite the bullet and see it. And I especially want as many people to do this as they can before the inevitable end-of-year best-of lists and award season rollouts happen, because while there are many things that are excellently achieved in The Brutalist that I could see someone safely arguing for it being one of the most well-produced and, quite frankly, daringly experimental films to be released this year, The Brutalist is exactly the sort of movie that suffers from its positive appraisal rather than gaining from it. Because a lot of people are only going to see the Rotten Tomatoes score, a lot of people are only going to see, oh, it won all these awards at film festivals all over the world, and the New York Film Critics Circle named it their best film of the year, and that's going to thrust this movie right in front of the eyeballs of a lot of people who are going to sit through 4 hours of it, maybe be quite captivated at least by the first half, only to sit through the second half and be like, what the was that? The Brutalist is not the sort of movie that I have a problem with anybody saying it was one of their favorite films of the year. In fact, as one movie snob to another, even as someone who didn't quite like it per se, I do respect that. But it's just not the sort of movie that I can say to your more parochial film lover that I want to encourage on their own journey of going outside of their comfort zone and challenging themselves with cinema and not just passively reacting to it. It's still not the sort of movie that I just go ahead and say without notation, yeah, this is just a beautifully shot, well-acted movie with a great score. No, The Brutalist, first and foremost, is an art film, and not even an art film in the sense of its being more stylish or more experimental in structure or form. Not just in the boutique branded way that we come to associate with art films, but an art film in the sense of this is the sort of movie that is best appreciated in terms of the spectator being willing to accept that the filmmakers are not approaching what they do in the conventional sense of trying to appeal emotionally to the audience. Not that there aren't very heartfelt and poignant aspects of this movie. I think Corbett and Fastfold really are, in their own way, making a very passionate and earnest attempt at describing in the epic melodramatic way that they see befitting it the story of the European immigrant experience in America, as well as the Jewish European experience after the Second World War. Actually, part of what did resonate so much for me about The Brutalist was how I saw it as a very subversive and defiant way of reframing a lot of what I think we as Americans often falsely imbibe about our magnanimity to outsiders and immigrants over our history, or our savior complex about the Second World War and how many Jews were taken as refugees from Europe to live in the United States. The entire relationship between Van Buren, very Germanically named, and Toth, and the melodramatic extremes in which the story of the film goes. What resonated so much about the film to me was the way it kind of allegorically portrayed how, yeah, the problems endemic to how European Jews were treated by European Gentiles, even in the United States, didn't suddenly go away after the Second World War. The film deals very passionately and inspiringly, to me, with this theme of European Jews still being taken advantage of and at best patronized and condescended to as this perennial wanderer and victim who is still looked down upon and exploited and mocked and made dependent upon one form of hegemony or another without really being accepted as fully human and equal. When Toth is at one of Van Buren's dinner parties and he is relating, in a very standoffish and reluctant way, giving into this part of this polite society dinner table conversation that inevitably turns to this kind of fetishistic need to hear about the horror stories, the horrible experiences of the European Jews. And there is this way in which Toth is able, in his conversation, to frame the acceptance of Jews as refugees after the Second World War as simply an expansion or an extension of the preconditions of that genocide, where it's not so much that people are rescuing the Jews, so much as it is that people are looking at the Jews and saying, there's something about you that made all of these white Gentiles rise up in this massive fury that tore the world apart in an intercontinental war. The Jew is still fundamentally being blamed, and so the whole idea is, well, we need to just put them somewhere else, anywhere else, so that they can't be used as scapegoats, not because of the persecution they faced, but because of how that scapegoating of them was comorbid with this giant geopolitical machine going awry. Which is all so much to say that the film has this character basically just telling his mostly Gentile audience that, look, you guys are still trying to get rid of us all over the world, everywhere we go, because you still blame us for the war. You're blaming the victim, and you're even in some cases blaming the people you've actively persecuted. You're not willing to take responsibility for either the persecution or the broader war itself. But you're only going to get to that substance of The Brutalist when you understand that, again, in my opinion, Corbett and Fastfold simply aren't working from an artistic perspective of trying to manipulate or guide the emotions of the spectator. The Brutalist is an art film in the sense that it is very much attempting to challenge the spectator to determine for themselves what the film means without a prescribed or at least conventional sense of them passively watching a sympathetic drama and instead being asked for themselves in whatever their emotional reaction is to this highly stylized, increasingly extreme and allegorical melodrama, the essence of this film as a work of art and not a commodity of popular entertainment. Even in a conventional sense, you're going to get a lot out of The Brutalist as a cinematic experience, which honestly is not as exhaustive as a 4-hour epic historical drama suggests. Quite frankly, there are plenty of more conventional or less experimental historical epics that are far bigger slogs than this one. But even that conventional sense, you're getting absolutely exquisite cinematography cinematography, with Corbett reuniting with cinematographer Lol Crawley, shooting on VistaVision 35mm film stock, and in the format I was lucky enough to see it in, blown up to 70mm to achieve this densely textured, granular look that alludes so openly and honestly more successfully than most any previous film I've seen at trying to emulate a sort of period look, but from a period of new Hollywood films about the past especially. There are parts of The Brutalist that are so striking in that it looks almost exactly how Francis Ford Coppola and Gordon Willis shot certain interiors of The Godfather, or almost exactly how Sergio Leone and Tonino Dellicoli shot Once Upon a Time in America. Pitch perfect homage, even though the budget of this movie, when you see how completely and utterly authentic it feels, the fact that it was achieved on large format film for only $10 million. I guess there's a reason why it feels like those 4 hours don't just crawl by, because even when not much is happening on a conventional narrative level, even when you are really honestly at times being asked by the film to spend an exhaustive amount of time simply experiencing the lives and events, the open-ended journey of these characters without any real emotional grounding or prescription of whether or not and how sympathetic you should feel, what you should find funny, what you should find dark and tragic. Even then, quite frankly, what makes all of that work is that you just are intuitively being able to see how every single cent of that $10 million is paying off in a film that looks so much better than any contemporary mainstream historical film that Hollywood even bothers to make anymore. Like, this movie puts Gladiator 2 to absolute shame. It makes me hate Gladiator 2 even more, and not just because Gladiator 2, now even after I've seen The Brutalist and been able to see a movie that is actually seriously interrogative about the relationship between the United States and the cultural persecution of European Jews, it is just giving me even more reason to buckle down and go full discourse mode and just being like, yeah, Gladiator 2. If Joseph Goebbels had produced Gladiator 2, what would be the major difference? You're also getting some absolutely phenomenal performances with, for my money, Guy Pearce kind of towering above everybody, delivering what to the untrained eye wouldn't necessarily seem like any more or less special than the typical archetype of a rich, waspy dilettante who so cluelessly attempts to throw his money around to project this image of a highly cultured man, except that what I think Pearce locks down is how even when this character is at his most performative, his most vainglorious for an audience of his rich peers, Pearce never loses sight of keeping himself from chewing the scenery, of keeping this character at just the right tenor of monotone boorishness that makes his cluelessness about himself all the funnier, but also so much more demonically realistic and identifiable, where so much depth about the world of the story is communicated by that sense of intuitive accuracy, where you can even just hear all of these rich extras going behind this guy's back and being like, God, it's bad enough that he's so pretentious, but does he also have to be such a dud? And the music, holy crap, when I tell you that Daniel Blumberg has composed one of the best scores of the year, even when I was kind of losing the plot with The Brutalist, you better believe that Blumberg's score kept its claws deeply sunk inside my soul. I felt like my DNA was shaking with every sustained, ominous drone of orchestral brass and interpolation of abrasive electronic or musique concrète or industrial elements even. even, which actually does work so well with the backdrop of Philadelphia at the post-war period. It's an absolutely exceptional collision of the texture of music with the texture of the visual language and the setting of the film. There are times at which this score on its own is as towering and terrifying as anything in any horror movie to come out this year. People think Terrifier 3 is disturbing. No, Terrifier 3 is a work of comedic masterpiece. Daniel Blumberg's score for The Brutalist. This is horror. This is creeping dread. You're even going to get, for what it's worth, a movie by filmmakers who are not simply passively interested in the brutalist style that defines Toth's fight throughout this movie, to be an artist, to see his vision realized against the odds of the constant questioning and means testing and doubts of his increasingly despondent benefactors. You can see how Corbett really has taken inspiration from the brutalist style to, again, without prescribing to the audience what their emotional relationship to what he's showing you should be, instructing them, as with the often cold and form-obsessed and alienating qualities of brutalist architecture, to see an ironic beauty in that coldness, in that alienation, in that grotesquerie, and even in that sense of forms that are so clearly stylized that they don't seem to describe anything other than the form itself. In other words, a style, but with almost a soullessness, a style that is deliberately extracted from a descriptive substance, a descriptive elan or spirit behind it, other than, of course, given its namesake, the brutal address of the work. From a certain perspective, I'm no stranger myself to criticizing in movies that aspect of something being so stylized that it's unhappily alienated from seeming to describe the film's subject in a compelling way. From a different perspective, though, I can nonetheless see the beauty of this brutalist film in distilling and conveying alienation as this ever-present ambiance to modernity, this cold vacancy that is always with us, but when it's finally thrown before us on this cinematic canvas, can be quite repulsive, can seem quite grotesque and gratuitous and odd and absurd, but where our reactiveness to it maybe suggests that we are in denial about something, that we are reacting so viscerally to something that calls forth so much that we would rather repress and bottle up and ignore about everyday life. And through the allegory of Toth as this constantly wandering, oppressed European Jew who just survived extermination, maybe even speaks to an unfathomable terror about how much horror and violence and repugnancy our world not only tolerates, but supports either actively or passively. You can get all of these things out of The Brutalist, but what you are not going to get is an easy viewing experience. And again, the 4 hours is the least of your problems. This is a film that in many ways seeks to alienate as a means of shocking you as a spectator from your complacency, to really engage with the film as a work of art, which, if nothing else, and should probably be the thesis of my own attempts at a more devotional kind of criticism, means that this is a film that wants you to really engage with it, even if you don't like it. It is a movie that is bold as an artistic statement can be, because it is prescribing to you, the spectator, if it prescribes nothing else, this sense of urgency that you not treat this as a commodity, that you allow this art, even in its brutal way, to penetrate your soul and make you think about how what it envisions as the overall experience of this type of character, what it must necessarily inform in your spirit going forward, going forth from the cinema, and not actually being satisfied by a cathartic cinematic experience, but actually coming out and coming away and being like, Not only do I not feel satisfied, I feel like this film deliberately teased me just so it could pull the rug out from under me and say, well, now you're on your own. This is the sort of movie that I find, because of its deeply frustrating, alienating, and increasingly absurd melodramatic qualities, for me, I cannot in good faith say that I liked it, or that I even necessarily personally think very highly of it. But I am prepared to say that it is the sort of movie that nonetheless does inspire me a little to at least talk, because it reminds me how often the true art that is possible, even in this world of oppressive commerce and commodity, the true art is that which, even when you don't necessarily get that much out of it yourself, it still inspires you because of how clearly it brings to the forefront of the culture surrounding a particular art or medium the idea that the audience should be shocked from complacency, should be shaken up every once in a while, should be inspired even to have negative feelings and reactions, should be deeply engaged with art itself as something that goes beyond simply a passive emotional experience. You'll get plenty of the latter from Reaction YouTube. Here, though, at Devotional Criticism on the New Movie Diary, we stand actually saying something about films, not just reacting to them. So again, The Brutalist, 2.5 out of 5, but that special 2.5 out of 5 that basically means this thing broke my algorithm. I don't really know what to tell you. You kind of just need to see it for yourself and come to your own decision. And please come back and talk about it. With that, I'm going to sign off. Thank you so much for sticking through this whole review. Don't be a stranger to the comment section. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? This is one of those movies where I'm really way more interested to see what other people who already saw it have to say, so I can really get into the weeds about it and what it is that really hits people deep when this thing finds exactly the person it was meant for. Other than that, if you enjoyed this video, please share, like, subscribe, bell, yada yada. My name is Ian Garcia. This is Devotional Criticism, and this was the New Movie Diary. I'm going to catch you guys next time.